Like all of the programs and services that we consider some of the best things that our sector has ever done, a lot of work went into getting that and a lot of effort, and it's all small things. And so we know that a lot of our organizations, particularly ones with larger histories, have been through a lot. We have to play the long game. And to be honest, that is what a lot of the nonprofits on the far right have been doing. So the idea then that somehow we shouldn't keep going or continue trying or build towards something together, like that's what we have to do. But also we have to know it might take us 50 years. Like, I genuinely do think that all the time in terms of the abortion debate that I just told you. Like, I'm like, okay, it took them 18 years to go from they shut down Parliament to victory on the Supreme Court of Canada. And I think about all the steps and all the different people across the country that helped make that happen. And most of them are people you've never heard of. Most of them are people who are just average women from all different backgrounds in the most diverse possible way who cared enough to try and tell people that pregnant people deserve to do what they want with their bodies, because they always have. And so if they gave up and just said, "Well, I'm done. I'm gonna go make some money in marketing now," like, it's hard, right? In that I understand people are having a hard time and we have to survive, right? But we know how to survive.
Hi, friends. Ever wondered how you could turn your big ideas into results? Together, let's reimagine a better sector, tackle systemic issues, and yes, raise some serious cash. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how to use historical thinking to serve your nonprofit's future. If you're new here, my name is Maria, and I'm an expert fundraiser with over 10 years of experience. I'm on a mission to make sure EDs can raise more money without the stress. I have a great guest to talk to you today, Robyn. Hi.
Hi, Maria. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited. I've been a big fan of the show for a long time.
Hey, so happy to have you. Robyn, for people who don't know you just yet, can you let us know who you are, what you do?
Yeah. My name's Robyn Schwartz. My pronouns are she, her. I've been working in nonprofits on and off for almost 20 years now, but I started as a lifeguard at a YMCA in BC and ended up going into academia for a bit to do some history work, which is part of what we're going to be talking about today. But when I was there, I was studying single moms in Ontario. That was my big PhD work. And I realized that a lot of the supports and services that single moms were being offered today, and this was in 2017, didn't really match with what I was seeing 50 years ago, in that single moms didn't have the same supports that they did from the government of Ontario in the 70s. And so that led me on a journey. I worked for a couple different nonprofits in program development, advocacy, all sorts of different things. And like you, eventually ended up in fundraising and communications because how important the resourcing and support for the work that we were doing was in terms of that advocacy and empowering the type of people that I wanted to support. And so now I work for myself. I co-founded my business. We do a number of different things at Dumbo Octopus. And so for folks who don't know, the Dumbo Octopus is very tiny. It lives in the bottom of the sea where there's no resources, where it has to adapt constantly, and then somehow it's able to thrive. And so we felt that that was a metaphor for what we wanted to do when we worked with different nonprofit clients. And our specialty is really that equity seeking leader, startup, like really small grassroots organization. And yeah, I just love talking with people and being a part of the sector. It's really great.
Nice. Okay. First, I love a Dumbo octopus. I love how you explained it because a lot of nonprofits, they're feeling the crunch right now. It's a very difficult time for a lot of nonprofits. They're thinking about their funding, they're thinking about succession planning, they're having difficulty hiring. What else are you seeing?
Everything. I see a lot of funding trends where because the economy and inflation and inequality is just growing rampant across North America and across the world, a lot of our funders are choosing to not give out as much because they say, well, we can't, we just don't have enough money. And that's really hard. Obviously, we know the impacts of the Trump administration on funding for US nonprofits. But I think in the Canadian context, people don't realize how much is currently being rolled back. I compared it yesterday with a client to before we had a full pie. And I would say that we had a pretty robust pie in, say, 2020, 2021, not because we were all well resourced. Like, those were really hard years, but governments across the world were spending money on supports for people. And so a lot of my clients and a lot of my friends who work in the sector were able to do really cool, innovative things that they had been thinking about for years because that pandemic recovery money was there. And what I'm seeing now, which reminds me a lot of what I remember the government being like in the early 2000s, is a lot of just, we don't have it, we can't help. I was applying for many grants at the small mental health nonprofit I worked at, and we were really successful in 2022, 2023. And I haven't seen that at all in the last year. It's like there's no place to even ask. And so what I'm seeing then happen is everyone is fighting over this one leftover piece of pie because they're telling us there is no pie left, but there's always pie in that there's always funding. Governments are not businesses. There is always choices that are made around what to invest in. And we are seeing right now the very, very, very dangerous impacts of governments around the world all choosing protectionism, scarcity. Let's fight over things instead of working together. And like, I know we're going to talk about this today. That reads the 1920s to me. It's actually scary because I taught Canadian history for many years at Western. How many parallels I'm seeing in real time that it just shouldn't be like this.
I love this idea of historical thinking. But before we dive into that, could you tell us a little bit of the parallels that you're seeing and why we should be paying attention to those things?
In terms of, like I said, those parallels, I think people hear the Roaring Twenties, right? Like it's the Great Gatsby, like that sort of abundance. And that is not what happened, in that there was a lot of economic instability coming out of World War One, and a lot of decisions that were made around the peace table at the Treaty of Versailles that meant that countries were punished economically for decisions that they had made in the war. And that means everyone. And so very similarly, in Canada in the 1920s, there was a lot of stagnation. There was a lot of people who were really frustrated with leadership that they felt hadn't changed, didn't understand the realities of what had happened during the war, when Canada lost more men in the war percentage-wise than any other country in the British Commonwealth. So even though the number of deaths was not as high as, say, places like England, more men per capita died in Canada. And so when we think about 1920s Canada, we're thinking about a country where there are no social services. All of these people have come back from Europe and they have been destroyed, whether physically they're disabled, whether mentally they're struggling with PTSD. And the government is saying, we can't help you. We already helped you a bunch. And there's also been a pandemic about 100 years ago, the pandemic of 1918, right? And so people are really struggling with this idea of what the state should be doing to support us. And so when we look at, everyone talks about the Great Depression, when I've taught this to students, it's actually been about this long conflict and long mistakes that were made by leadership globally. But to say that like this one thing happened and the stock market crashed and then everything was bad is to let them off for how many terrible decisions were made around the economy and how we support people when they are struggling throughout that basically 15-year period.
I feel like the way that you talked about it really makes it clear how cyclical history can be. Like, even thinking about the pandemic, the 2020 pandemic, at that time, I remember thinking, like, how safe are nonprofits right now? How stable are they at a time where we're, projecting inflation and recession because of the pandemic?
And I remember looking at the 2008 crash in the States and thinking, well, lots of nonprofits made it through. So the sector is pretty recession proof in some ways, which was interesting to like be able to look back and make decisions about my future career in the sector, and will I have a job in a year, right?
Yeah.
So that was very, very interesting. And I think a lot of leaders, they don't look back. They really just look forward.
Well, and the rise of technology in the last 30 years, so many people, I think, are so stuck in this short-term thinking because that is what all of these new tools we've been given so quickly are doing to us. And I don't mean that in like, oh, like conspiratorial thinking. Using that same thing that we were in terms of comparative that we were talking about, the radio and the invention of the radio and the ability of the radio to just be like anyone can pick up a radio and create a radio show and broadcast. That happened in the 1920s and it really disrupted how ideas were shared. Because if anyone can have a platform, well, you've seen what happened now in the US and the rise of the far right and the manosphere. Those parallels are so clear to me because we had to figure out that there needed to be regulations around radio. And we also had to learn to talk to the people who were saying things that were not true or that were racist or that were conspiracy theories because they were hurt by decisions that were not in their control, right? And so I notice a lot, like I before we started recording, we were talking about how I think humanities degrees are really important and that I feel like a lot of people haven't gotten humanities degrees in the last 15 years because of what you just said. Am I going to have a job? And so a lot of folks who would have gotten longer term, big, deep thinking skills, people aren't learning how to think deep and long because that's not what they're being told to do at work. It's not what they're being told to do at school. And it's not how they're interacting with the world these days. And so nonprofit leaders, I think, get really caught in, like you just said, oh, we already went through the pandemic. So how is it that things are still hard? So I started working in this sector for an abortion clinic. And so I'm really in touch with that movement and have been in touch with that movement across North America in reproductive justice for the last 10 years. The organization I used to work for has been funded and defunded and funded and defunded multiple times throughout its now 52-year history because of politics.
So let's talk about that a little bit more because we do see like Roe v. Wade was overturned. And also now there's talks about like how can we overturn queer marriage, right? So there is the ebbs and flows of policy. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how nonprofit leaders can not panic when something like this comes up again, because it will come up again. We've been here before, we will be here again. So how can you remain calm and use kind of bigger trends or like analysis to move forward?
Well, I think part of this is talking to people in your sector, in your area, and learning their stories. You mentioned Roe versus Wade. The trends and feminist movement around sexual and reproductive justice is one of my areas of expertise. I had the immense privilege in 2020 of getting to work with a bunch of different sexual and reproductive health leaders across Canada to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Abortion Caravan. The Abortion Caravan is my favorite story to tell people because the feminist movement in Canada is not the same as the US. In the US, they go for the courts first. We know the courts are not a safe place for equity. The court are slow. They don't change as quickly as people. And what nonprofits can do is connect people on the ground with issues. And so how do I know this works? Well, the 1970 Abortion Caravan was a group of young women who drove together from Vancouver in a Volkswagen Beetle to Parliament, and they are the first and only group of protesters to ever shut down Canadian Parliament. They snuck chains in under their skirts because they were just innocent women, and they got into the galleries, and they did not stop shouting until they were removed because they were fighting a bill that had, similar to that decriminalizing homosexuality bill, that was a big bill. The 1969 Omnibus Bill changed a lot of different laws like this in the criminal code. And they made it so that in Canada, you could get an abortion, but only if 3 doctors signed off and said that they agreed that you needed it. So in practice, how that worked is that women would have to stand in front of committees of men because there were no female abortion providers. And they would have to explain why they felt they were worthy of that procedure. And so these women, they got together and they organized, they stopped in cities across the country and explained why this law wasn't fair. They talked about the fact that poor women would be hurt by it, that newcomer women. And so they succeed. They shut down Parliament. It becomes a national news story. And that is the first step in the 18-year journey to R.V. Morgenthaler, which is our version of Roe versus Wade, in which Canada's abortion law, that one that I just mentioned, was struck down as unconstitutional under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the women I am talking about, many of whom were nonprofit women, women who were like the types of people that we all work with every single day in our organizations, they were waiting. They knew that they would lose. And so they waited until they had enough public opinion on their side to then convince Dr. Henry Morgenthaler, who had been performing illegal abortions in Montreal for like 20 years. He'd been arrested multiple times. Because Quebec has different laws, it was actually women then who convinced him to come to Ontario to challenge the federal law. He didn't want to at first. He was like, no, I'm happy, just like people can come to my clinic. I'm going to help them, because that's all he wanted to do. And so you can see there how learning these stories and knowing, like, that's an 18-year journey to make that happen. But the result of it is that Canada is the only country in the world that doesn't have an abortion law for bad reasons. And I say that because like countries like North Korea don't have abortion laws on the book, but it's because you don't have bodily autonomy or rights there. In Canada, we also don't have heart surgery laws. We don't have skeleton x-ray laws. We don't name any number of medical procedures, because abortion is a medical procedure. And so when we think about it that way, if you look at the US had Roe versus Wade in 1973. So Canada was backwards. But by the 90s, we have become one of the human rights bastions in the world because of work that many, many, many women, and I'm talking Indigenous women, working class women, there's a huge wave of immigration from Eastern Europe after the Second World War. And those women are all coming here and setting up settlement services and working together to try and build the communities that they know they deserve. Like all of the programs and services that we consider some of the best things that our sector has ever done, a lot of work went into getting that, and a lot of effort, and it's all small things that people whose names we're never going to know because the story Victors Write History is true. But I would say in our sector, privileged middle and upper class white women are often the ones who are writing the stories that we hear and are told. And so we know that a lot of our organizations, particularly ones with larger histories, have been through a lot. We have to play the long game. And to be honest, that is what a lot of the nonprofits on the far right have been doing. And so the idea then that somehow we shouldn't keep going or continue trying or build towards something together, like that's what we have to do. But also we have to know it might take us 50 years. And if we start thinking about that, if it is going to take me, like, I genuinely do think that all the time in terms of the abortion debate that I just told you. Like, I'm like, okay, it took them 18 years to go from they shut down Parliament to victory on the Supreme Court of Canada. And I think about all the steps and all the different people across the country that helped make that happen. And most of them are people you've never heard of. Most of them are people who are just average women from all different backgrounds in the most diverse possible way, who cared enough to try and tell people that pregnant people deserve to do what they want with their bodies, because they always have. And so if they gave up and just said, well, I'm done, I'm going to go make some money in marketing now, like it's hard, right? In that I understand people are having a hard time and we have to survive, right? But we know how to survive. You also mentioned like the 2020, 2021. I too was like, am I going to have a job? I literally just left academia and moved to Kitchener-Waterloo 12 months before the pandemic broke out. I had been working full time at my position that I had like fought and like done so much work towards for 12 months. And then I got locked in a 1-bedroom apartment alone. But same thing, like I was like, where am I going to have a career? Because I've tried history. Oh, they got rid of all the prof jobs. I've tried this. They got rid of all those jobs. Okay, maybe I need to stop thinking it's going to be one job or it's going to be one way. And I just need to work towards the world that I actually want to see. And I need to think about how can I keep everyone with me through that, which as leaders is really hard. Like I know our nonprofit friends are holding so many different people's emotions. Like it is not an easy time to be an ED at all. It is. And I know we've said that forever, but like something has shifted in the water. And I can say that very confidently with my expertise that this is unprecedented times. When we thought the pandemic was unprecedented times, no, we've lived through stuff like that. Like this is the once in 100-year storm that we've been waiting for, that everyone's been talking about since the 90s with the boomers retiring and this thing and changes. All of those things you and I grew up hearing about how the world was changing. It's happened. We are in it. I've had 5 people today tell me they don't have enough money for the next 6 months. And I don't see anything coming. But that doesn't mean that I don't know how to fix this. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to roll up my sleeves and try different things and see what actually works, because that's what my colleagues had to do 100 years ago so that we could get healthcare or whatever other number of great things that happened that my parents and grandparents benefited from, right?
Okay. Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that information. I think the stories really illustrate exactly what you're talking about and like the kind of thinking that we should be adopting as a sector. For people who want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn a lot like you. So I'm Robyn Schwartz on LinkedIn. I think I have an octopus emoji in my name, so it should make it easy for people to find me. DumboOctopusConsulting.com is my business website. And then I have a project that I am slowly building, and that is a Substack called The Bridge. I could talk like this forever. I've done it. So I'm trying to find a way to put together really smart, short pieces that bring together present day issues, past trends, and also really cool resources, because I love sharing. It's why I listened to the Small Nonprofit podcast, even when Cindy was the host. Like I love learning. And so, yeah, The Bridge, I think it's The Bridge to Tomorrow is the URL on Substack. So I would love folks to come and find me there.
Nice. And we'll add those links to the show notes. So if you are listening to this episode, you can just go there and follow Robyn and all the amazing work that she's doing. But that's it for today's episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. Like always, if you want to watch this episode, you can see our lovely faces on YouTube. But I hope that you got a lot out of today's episode and start thinking about the broader patterns and trends that we might be missing or overlooking and how they can inform your organizational strategy. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.